All right, in this video, we're going to look at getting input from the user. So we've got some notes here, JavaScript input, and I talked about click events, which is definitely input from the user, right? When they click on elements on the screen, we have to run some code. We're going to look at prompt. We've already kind of used that or seen that briefly, but we'll see how we can use that and store the results in variables and use that. And then also with input elements on the page. Now, I was going to start with click events, but I think I'm actually going to do prompt first. I have this first HTML that we did here, and I'm just going to delete that incrementing and decrementing variable stuff, and I'm going to uncomment this. So I'm going to select this all, Control/ to uncomment it, and I'm going to give it a new title, JavaScript input and output. And actually, the main focus of this entire section is input, process, output. And we're going to see that right now. So in this example, we had these two variables, name and time of day, and then we took the value of those variables and processed them, right? We put them inside of this string and did concatenation. We added them together into a sentence, a message, and then we outputted that message. And instead of console.log, I think I'm just going to change that to alert for now. Okay, so if we run this, it should just say, hello, Azra, have a nice afternoon. Okay. So what I want to change in this is I want to change this section here with these variables where we just defined these variables and assigned them values. Instead of assigning them values, I'd like to get the name and the time of day from the user. I want that to be input. Once I get the input from the user, I'm going to process it into a message, and then I will output the result. That's my algorithm, right? My step-by-step set of instructions. Get some input, build a message out of that input, and then output the result. So very simple. When we do the prompt function like this, the prompt function returns. And actually, remember when we first played around with it in the console here, just going to clear that. And we did prompt, what is your, look at that, it even shows up. What is, okay, sorry, apparently I don't know how to complete this. Click, there we go. Right, I say Mr. V, and you can see that prompt function returns the string Mr. V. Okay, so when we do that in our code, I'm going to just replace this exactly with what I did, prompt, what is your name? And this prompt function returns this string. So really, we can think of it as this will become, I'm just going to delete it for a second, it'll become Mr. V. So name will be assigned Mr. V, which is what that prompt function returned. Oh, I'm just going to hit undo, actually. Control Z for undo. So this will open that pop-up window. The user will type something in. It'll return what they typed in, and it'll get stored in that variable. And then we do the same thing here. Prompt, what time of day is it? Okay. And now when I run this program, here's my input part. What is your name? Let's do this. Nathan. What time of day is it? Night. And it says, hello, Nathan. Have a nice night. Ta-da! Okay, so that's an input, process, output program where we get input with the prompt function and we get output with the alert function. Okay, and we process using this addition stuff. Okay, now what I'd like to get into is we started learning more about HTML, right? And being able to interact with the web page, selecting elements, document.getElementById. by ID. So I want to modify this a little bit. Let's just clean up our HTML. I really don't need all this. Well, let's keep that button. Sure, we'll keep this. Click this button, and then I want to have another paragraph that's just going to be empty. And I'm going to give it the ID of message or greeting. Let's do that, greeting. Okay, and then this button should have an ID as well, so I can select it. And I'm just going to call this BTN. Okay, we'll hit run on that. Oh, see, okay, so actually this is a good place to initialize or talk about this, is this idea that it's just kind of annoying because whenever I load this page or refresh this page, it automatically pops up. And it says, what is your name, Megan? And it's morning. Good morning, Megan. Okay, so every time I run the page, it does that. I'd like it to respond to the user's click. So I want it so that whenever I click the page or I click this button, that it's going to run that code. So that's where we get into the idea of event listeners, click events. So for this, we have to understand a couple of important things. The first thing is a function. So a function is basically, we've been using functions, right? JavaScript has some predefined functions like alert and prompt, but we can write our own functions as well. And I want you to think of a function as like a group of commands, a block of code, right? There's code that gets put inside of this function, and it kind of gets stored there. I think of it as like in science, potential energy. There's this code here that has the potential to do something, but it won't do it until we actually tell that code to do something, or until we say, hey, an event happened, please run that code. So we can define a function, and then we can add an event listener to an element, to the page or to some element. And then when the click event happens, we say, hey, run the greeting function. So this is a named block of code as the name greeting, and it'll run the code inside of there. So let's look at that in the example here. So if I go back to my JavaScript file, what I want to do is I want to take all of this code and put it inside of a function, right? Because right now, whenever I run the page, this stuff shows up, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So I'm going to put this inside of a function, and I'll call it greeting. And I'm doing this too fast. Okay, so when I define a function, we use the keyword function. Then we do the name of the function, which in this case is greeting. We do an open and close parentheses. You just have to. We'll talk more about those in CS20 actually. And then we do an open brace and a closing brace. And this open and closing brace is what specifies where the function begins and ends. So anything between these braces is that block of code, the stored code. So I'm going to take all of this, Control X to cut it, Control V to paste it inside of it. And what we normally do, if I hit auto format now, you'll notice it tabs it for me because we want to make it very clear, just like paragraphs when you're writing in English, right? You tab to indent to let it know that, hey, this is the block of code, right? It begins and ends here. It makes it a lot easier to see. So now watch this. When I hit run, hey, it didn't prompt, no pop-up windows. It didn't prompt me. It didn't alert anything. Is this JavaScript code broken? Let me try going alert, hi. I hit run. Okay, it said hi. So this code ran, but it's because this code isn't inside of the function, right? We've stored this code here inside of the function, and it won't run until we tell this function to do its job. Okay, so I'm going to call this an event function. That's just a little title. And up here now, I want to have an event listener. So the way we do this is we first need to select an element. So document will be, I'm just going to do document. I'm not going to do get element by ID right now. Let's just start with document, which is the entire page. Okay, the HTML document. Dot add event listener has that nice autocomplete for us. And then inside of this, so this is a method or a function. So we need to invoke it by doing parentheses. And inside of this, we give it some information. And we need two things. So I'm going to separate it by commas. The first thing we need is what kind of event am I going to listen for? And most commonly in this class, we're just going to listen for click events. There's tons of other events, but for now, we're just going to focus on click events. And you put that inside of quotations, click. And then here, we need to give it a function, right? When this event happens, the click event happens on the document, what are we going to do? And I just give it the name of this function, greeting. Okay, that's it, right? This is told JavaScript. It says, hey, JavaScript, there's some stored code inside of this function. When the document is clicked, run the code inside of that function called greeting. Okay, so run now. It's added the event listener, so when I click anywhere on the document, ta-da, Mr. V, and it's the morning. Wonderful, thanks for the greeting. Okay, cool. Now, one thing we can add to this as well is instead of adding the event listener to the document, we can add a get element by ID here. Okay, and then the ID will be BTN. So now it says, hey, document, get the element with the ID BTN, and then add an event listener to it. So when I click the button, it'll run that greeting. Okay, let's run that. So now, right, when I click the documents, it's not doing anything. But when I click the button, now it'll set off the code that is inside of the function greeting. All right, so that's some of the key ideas of input. These click events are input from the user, right? They clicked on something on the page, so I can process that event using event listeners and functions, and then we can get text input from the user by using that prompt, storing it in variables and doing stuff. I'm going to wrap up this video here, but in the next video we'll look at changing this so that the input and output doesn't happen in the pop-up windows. It'll happen on the page here. Okay, so that should be pretty cool. All right, hope that made sense. Take care, and we will see you in the next video.